Hi, I'm Katie Duke, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years. Listen, I used to think that I was my most stylish in my 20s, but honestly, style and confidence only get better with age. And that is why I love Figs. These scrubs are beautiful, comfortable, and they are built to last. They're not those boxy, scratchy uniforms that we all started out in. No. These fit perfectly. They feel amazing, and the quality is just wow! My favorite color? Burgundy. It's chic, it's timeless, and it's even the same color as my apartment, because I'm kind of obsessed with it. And I love adding custom embroidery to make my scrubs as personal as my style. And since I work in telehealth, my embroidered figs even double as my ID badge. It's never too late to reinvent yourself or your scrubs. Get 15% off your first order at wearfigs.com with the code FIGSRX. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX for 15% off your first order.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Past Macabre, where we journey through history to uncover how our relationship with death reflects the values, fears, and hopes that shape the way people live. I'm your host, Stephanie Rice. Thank you for joining me for episode 14, The Kandakes of Kush. And for this episode, we'll explore the Kushite Empire that rose in modern-day Sudan around 800 BCE. They controlled a major trade route between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean region. They conquered Egypt, and they stood against the might of the Roman Empire. Their queens played a major role in shaping Kush into the powerhouse that it became. They were known by the title of Kandake, and several ruled in their own right without a king. And even when they ruled alongside their kings, they had unprecedented power compared to everyone else in the region. The Kandake personally led their armies into battle and won, and they commissioned major construction projects fit for kings of Egypt. We'll trace the stories of these powerful women through the art found in their ancient tombs and temples. Now let's dive in and learn more about Kush and these queens of the Nile. When we talk of ancient empires along the Nile, Egypt often dominates the conversation. But it wasn't the only powerful culture to flourish along the fertile banks. To the south of Egypt, in the region called Nubia, the Kushite Empire rose from the late Bronze Age collapse to become a powerful force that conquered Egypt and stood up to the Roman Empire and won. The Kushite Empire, or just Kush, covered what is now the northern half of modern-day Sudan and a little bit of the southern part of Egypt. The entire region of Nubia, which extended even further south than the Kingdom of Kush's borders, was constantly in conflict with their northern neighbors, Egypt. Even before the Kushite Empire was founded, the Kingdom of Kerma, which was the predecessor, and began around 2500 BCE and lasted to about 1500 BCE when Egypt conquered it, was constantly in conflict with Egypt over those hundreds of years. It began roughly around the same time as the Old Kingdom of Egypt and was obviously a contemporary force to be reckoned with. But we don't learn about it as much in the history books as we do Egypt. Many of the different culture groups who lived throughout Nubia and throughout different time periods were exquisitely skilled with bows and arrows. This led the ancient Egyptians to call the land Ta Seti, which meant land of the bow. During the Kingdom of Kerma, the people were able to develop these uniquely powerful longbows that were 6 to 7 feet long. When a bow is incredibly long and used with more firm wood, that makes it a lot harder to pull, but that makes the force of the shot even more powerful. Some ancient writers even said that not everyone would be able to use these bows, and some men, even if they were very large, had to use their feet and their hands in order to push on the bow and pull the string back. Their formidable skills and their unique weaponry led to them being hired as mercenaries quite often throughout their early history before they were conquered by Egypt. In fact, Egypt even hired them a time or two. The most famous example was when Kamoza hired them in order to fight the Hyksos in order to end the Second Intermediate Period and found the new Kingdom of Egypt. With the aid of the powerful Nubian fighters, the pharaoh was able to reunify Egypt, and without them, who knows what might have happened. But then, not long after that, Egypt turned on their allies and often hired mercenaries and took their lands by force and annexed them into Egypt. But they didn't go easily, and constant rebellions happened over the nearly 500 years that Egypt controlled the area. And then, roughly around 1200 BCE, the Late Bronze Age collapse began. It was the result of large-scale climate change and political instability and food scarcity and massive migrations that just disrupted the entire region and led to several different civilizations collapsing, including the New Kingdom of Egypt. During this period of chaos, the people of Nubia were able to take advantage of this political disunity and break free of Egypt's hold on them. Around 800 BCE, they officially grew to become their own unified, free entity separate from Egypt, and they were forming their own cultural identities separate from what Egypt had been imposing on them. They formed their new kingdom around a capital at Napata, and they called their new kingdom Kush. Kush quickly grew in power, and by 720 BCE, they were able to conquer all of Egypt during its disrupted Third Intermediate Period and reunify it under their 26th dynasty. The Kushites of the 26th dynasty ruled it for 60 years, roughly, until Assyria came and invaded, and then they took it by force. Even though they lost Egypt, the Kushite Empire kept going strong. Kushite rulers continued military campaigns into Upper Egypt and kept pushing the southern boundary of Egypt, gaining territory, losing sometimes, and then regaining it again. During this time, they also built more monuments than previous generations had, and the monuments became larger and more elaborate. This massive boom in monument building, as well as tombs from the time period, show us that this was a period of economic prosperity for the Kingdom of Kush. Over time, the Kushite rulers slowly moved the capital from Napata to Meroe. It's very interesting that it was done in a very slow fashion. It wasn't until about 270 BCE that the capital, most royal residences, and the royal necropolis were all completely moved to Meroe. Archaeological research done in the area shows that Meroe is definitely a strategic location. As I said, it's just interesting that they took such a long time in order to settle it. It took roughly 300 years from about 570 BCE to 270 BCE for the move to take place completely to Meroe. The area around Meroe was very rich in iron, and so archaeologists believe that this is one of the main reasons that Meroe was initially established. During the Meroitic period, they made a lot of iron materials, from tools to weapons, and they sold it all over the region, from across the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. The location of Meroe allowed it to become this major trade hub, and it was located on a branch of the Nile that made it very easy to move goods by boat for much longer than many other trade routes that were along the more north part of the Red Sea coast. Archaeological evidence also shows that by the time the move to Meroe was complete, there was more fertile land here and more farms than there had been previously at Napata. During the Meroitic period, women held quite a lot of power, and kingship was viewed to be passed down matrilineally instead of like father to son. The king's male children were not the immediate heirs. It would be the sister of the king who passes the right to rule to her children. Then, if she had none, women who were the first cousins of the king would be the next to the king in order to pass down the lineage through them. There's also evidence that women were a very important part of the coronation ceremonies in the Merowe kingdom. The king's mother performed a ritual of her bestowing the power of kingship onto her son, and then the king's wife and the king's mother both gave different speeches during the coronation events that often lasted several days. The events, not the speeches. During this period, too, maternal goddesses took a central role in the pantheon. Osiris didn't really have as big of a role in most of the mythology here as he did in ancient Egypt. Isis or Aset and Horus still did represent the king's mother, protecting and bestowing power onto Horus, her son, who was the next king. But less emphasis was placed on Osiris's role as Horus's father and king of the underworld. There was also a lot of worship of Bastet and Mut going on at the time, who were also seen as maternal goddesses, and the queen mother or the queen could sometimes rule by herself. These powerful royal women of the Meroitic kingdom held the title Kandake. In some ancient writings, the writers got a little bit confused and they thought that Kandake was the name of the queen, and it was also Latinized to Candace. And thankfully, we have learned quite a lot from the tombs that have been found of these powerful Kandake who ruled on their own in the ancient Meroitic kingdom, and also the ones who ruled alongside their husbands or on behalf of their sons. And even if they didn't hold power on their own, they were still depicted as equals with the king, as if the duality of male and female were required to fully complete the kingship. And now let's take a look at the Kandakes, who, for whatever reason, ended up ruling on their own, and they left an important mark, and their monuments sing their tales thousands of years later. The first Kandake that archaeologists know ruled on her own was Kandake Nahirko. She ruled around 145 BCE. Her husband died most likely early-ish in his reign, and then their oldest son died shortly after he became king. We see this based on the depictions that we have of Nahirko with her husband, and then only one depiction of her with her son as king, and then his tomb has been found, and it does seem that he died relatively young. Nahirko then ruled until her other son came of age in order to take the throne. Her tomb had previously been found at Merowe, but it was thought to have belonged to a different queen. After a lot of research was done on it, though, especially some paleogeography research, which is study of the rocks and especially rock carvings and rock art, it was determined that she's actually a separate queen from the one that they had previously thought. And then after a lot of research, it finally in 2017, they were able to piece together her lineage through iconography that was found at the tomb of her husband and the tomb of her son, and then identify this tomb as belonging to her. Her pyramid is the largest of the pyramids that are found in the cemetery where she is. And what's very interesting is a lot of the carvings of her depict her in the regalia of a king instead of the regalia of a queen. Prior to her inscriptions, there hadn't been any depictions of any of the Kandake wearing the garb that was designated for kings. A statue was found in her tomb that shows Nahirko standing side by side with a man, presumably her husband, possibly her son, but they're depicted as the same exact size. In this statue, Nahirko is also wearing the garb of the kings that would have been only worn on men, and the man that's depicted with her is shown in plain garb with none of the regalia, accessories, or anything that would have identified him as a prince or a king in any of the other Kushite art that's been found. One of the reliefs on the walls of her tomb shows her sitting on a throne with bound enemies underneath her throne and feet. This was a very common motif in ancient Egypt, and then it was taken on also throughout Nubia's history, and it was a traditional way to show the enemies of the pharaoh being defeated, and they would be essentially walked on, stepped on, they would be left underneath the feet of the pharaoh. This depiction of Nahirko with the enemies bound underneath her feet was used to depict that she had military victories under her rule, and it was also a way to call her enemies weak. A relief on another wall within her tomb shows her within the weighing of the heart ritual, just like the tombs of the pharaohs of dynastic Egypt would have been shown. This was a very important ritual that was part of the afterlife that ancient Egyptians would go through, and this is where the heart of the deceased would have been weighed against the feather of Mat, or justice. And if the heart is lighter than the feather, the person is able to go on to the good afterlife, basically. And otherwise, their heart would be eaten by a monster called Amit. The reliefs go on to show that Nahirko did pass the test, and she continued into the afterlife where she rests eternally with the gods. And it is very important that we found her tomb and attributed it successfully to her, because now we can understand more exactly who she was and the fact that she was so incredibly important and powerful that she has the largest tomb in the entire necropolis. And that includes the kings that came after her as well, not just the kings that came before her. She also has all of these very important religious and political iconography holding the status of king and establishing that obviously this was accepted. There was no intentional destruction of her tomb or the reliefs within it or any of the art. And that goes to show how widely accepted that it was that these Kandake would step in and continue to rule. As long as everything was handled, they were considered great rulers just the same as any of their king peers would have been. The next Kandake who ruled all on her own is probably the most famous both in antiquity and modern times. Kandake Amani-Renas ruled from about 40 BCE to about 10 BCE, and she's the warrior queen who fought Rome and won. She came to power similar to Nahirko in that her husband died very early on in his reign, and his heir was very, very young still. And then, unfortunately, the heir died while he was still the prince, and the only time that he has an inscription with the title that a king would have was in his funerary inscription. Now, during this period, Rome was expanding very, very quickly. This was right after the entire saga with Julius Caesar, his assassination, Cleopatra, Mark Antony, and their deaths, and Rome was looking to move southward into Nubia. So this was not the time for political upheavals and attempts to find new heirs, so Amani-Renas took the throne for herself with the support of her people. She was the first Kandake to take the title of Kora, which essentially meant king and was previously only used in the context of male kings. Amani-Renas not only protected Kush from the Romans, but she also proactively attacked Roman Egypt as well. She was able to take the modern-day city of Aswan and the entire area around it, which was a very strategic point along the Nile. By this point, many, many, many Egyptian rulers and Nubian rulers over time had placed all sorts of monuments there, and the new Roman emperors, Augustus especially, started doing the same. Whenever they took the city, the Kushites also stole all of the statues of Augustus that were there. And as part of the peace negotiations that came later, they ended up giving them back, all except for the head of a bronze statue. This bronze head of Augustus was found at a temple in Meroe, and it's right at the beginning entrance where everybody would walk into the threshold. they would walk over Augustus. And it's the same type of imagery, but on a more elaborate scale that shows the enemies of the Kushites being trampled on by the ruler and the elites. The statue was likely buried with a great ceremony and a lot of attention drawn to it in order to make the point of the disrespect meant for Augustus when they did this. And luckily for us, this actually preserved the statue so well. It's one of the only examples of a Roman bronze statue that still has the eyes and everything so pristinely intact. Within the temple that the head of Augustus is buried in front of, there's a relief of a deity on a throne. Unfortunately, the top half has been lost due to damage from weather over time, so it's unclear which deity exactly it was meant to be. But on the bottom of their throne, underneath the deity's feet, are bound prisoners. One of these prisoners is one of the only examples of a distinctly Roman prisoner that has very obviously Roman garb. This is also another example of an intentional way to show that the Romans were the enemies of the Kushites, but Amanirenas trampled them and defeated them with the blessings of this god. Amanirenas negotiated a peace treaty with Augustus, and the terms were heavily in favor for Kush. While she did have to return most of the bronze statues, she was able to secure a militarized border, basically, that kept Rome back, and they had to remove themselves from any of the other territories that they had claimed during their war of expansion. This was the first time that Rome actually had to just leave behind a place where they had been expanding without being fully just decimated in battle or through the elements, the way that it had been up in the UK with the Tales of Boudica and that period, everything north of Hadrian's Wall. Here, through the use of military and diplomacy, Amanirenas was able to send Rome packing and completely halt their southern expansion. They did not attempt again until much, much later, definitely not within her lifetime. Amanirenas was blind in one eye, and this was even so remarkable that some Roman writers wrote about it. But it seems that she actually lost her eye in battle, because early depictions of her don't have any scars, but then later depictions of her show her with 3 deep scars over one of her eyes. This is one of many examples that shows that she was most likely actively leading the charge in all of the battles against Rome. She's also depicted in most of her reliefs as wearing a weapon of some kind, most often a bow and arrow, and then also she's wearing a shield as well. And Roman writers even spoke of the Kandake that would enter into battle with her people, though they didn't exactly explain who it was. We can assume that it's Amanirenas given the context. She was certainly a fierce warrior queen, and she led a very, very successful period of rule. Now, researchers are fairly sure that Amanirenas was the last of her royal bloodline, but her immediate successor was another Kandake who ruled all on her own, and it's not exactly clear how she was chosen, but she did a very great job as well. Kandake Amanishakato was known for her wealth and prolific building. Thanks to the treaty that Amanirenas had secured with Rome, the Kushite Empire was thriving economically by now. Amanishakato was able to expand this even further and extend all of the trade routes through Rome and get even more goods flowing. Thanks to this prosperity, she was able to commission the major temples at Naga, which, following this, every ruler after her continued to add on, and this became a major religious center. Previously, some construction had existed, but it really expanded after Amanishakato. Her pyramid has been identified at the same necropolis where Neherko's pyramid is. While her pyramid isn't as big, it does show a lot of very large reliefs and has a more elaborate entire pyramid complex that goes with it. including a large pylon that depicts her spearing enemies on one side and then holding a bow on the other. And then in both, she's got enemies tied to ropes at her feet. So this goes to show that she may have been mostly known for the economic prosperity, but she did have some uprisings on the borderlands or enemies from other parts of their borders that she was having to deal with during her period, and she was victorious over. The contents that were found with her in her tomb are why she is known best for her wealth. She was found with very elaborate golden jewelry and jewels and all sorts of goods that were truly just extravagant. Some of the best examples of both Kushite jewelry and very, very fine craftsmanship, as well as trade goods from all over the Mediterranean and Africa. Unfortunately, her tomb was looted in antiquity, and so even what we have found was only a very, very small amount. It was just the cash that they were able to find that hadn't been completely taken away by prior looters. We can only imagine what sort of riches were found even before it was looted. And more research has to be done on exactly how prosperous the entire Kushite Empire was under her reign, but clearly it was doing very well. Next was Kandake Shenaktakito, who most likely ruled immediately after her predecessor, but her timeline has become a little more fuzzy. It was previously thought that she was the very first Kandake to rule on her own, but research proved that that was Nahirko. Now that has left Shenaktakito a little bit confused in the timeline. Based on the research that was done, researchers think that she came after, if not immediately, then within another generation of Amani Shaketo, because the style of their art is very, very similar. The timeline mix-up originally came from the fact that most of what we know from Shenaktakito comes from a temple that she built at Naga. It was previously thought that the temple there was older than it actually is, but more research was done there, and it's proven that she actually built her temple on top of the core of a much older temple that was previously there, and that's what skewed the dates. On this temple, Shenaktakito actually depicts herself as the king, wearing the kingly regalia, and she calls herself Son of Re, Lord of the Two Lands, just like the kings would have. And she's the first Kandake to rule in that way, even though, as we've seen before, some of them did dress as the kings did. Some of them took on the name Korra, which was essentially king. But in this manner, she used an older title that came from ancient Egypt and referred to herself as the Son of Re in the way that the older pharaohs would have done back in the dynastic period. Now, we aren't quite sure about where her tomb is because, again, it was previously thought that she was the first Kandake to rule, and based on that dating, they had attributed the pyramid that actually is Nahirko's to her. There's no inscriptions of the name within the pyramid, and that's what led to the confusion. It was mostly just based on the dating. And now, researchers think that they might have found Shenaktakito's tomb, but they're not 100% sure because, again, of the lack of inscriptions that remain in what's left of the tomb today. Hopefully, we have newer research coming out soon that will allow more information to come out so we can learn even more about Shenaktakito now that we have learned more about Nahirko. The next Kandake was Kandake Amanitore, and it's, again, similar with the previous, that it's not quite sure exactly where in the lineage she stood, if she was an immediate successor or if there was a king in between. But Kandake Amanitore actually never ruled on her own, but she gets honorable mention because she was co-regent with her husband and held equal power. On her own, she undertook a lot of huge construction projects separate from the projects that her husband had done. And one of them is an amazing feat of engineering known as the Great Hafir. And a Hafir is a water harvesting system that Meroe especially utilized, but a lot of Nubia ended up utilizing. And it's essentially a funnel that's dug into the earth, and it's meant to capture the rainwater that is scarce. But then when it does happen, it comes down in a monsoon-like rain. So these are built to capture the rain, and then they can supply the area with water for quite a while. Well, the Great Hafir is larger than any other. It's over 250 meters in diameter, or 820 feet. It is massive. It would have held a huge reservoir full of water and would have supplied the area for quite a while. And Naga was a temple town, as previously said. So this would have been supplying all of the priests, everyone who supported the town, the temples, and anybody nearby who was part of the farms that would have supported the temples as well. Amonitore also took on several construction projects to restore the major temples of Amun that had been destroyed by the Romans in previous years. Her pyramid is huge, though not the largest, like Nahirko's was, and it shows her smiting her enemies the same way that kings would have depicted themselves. And Amonitore also took on a construction project to add to the temple of Dhaka that was dedicated to Thoth. On one of the temples that she built, there's a relief that shows her sitting on a throne with 9 bows beneath her. And similar to depictions of enemies beneath someone on their throne, these 9 bows were a common way that ancient Egyptians had referred to their enemies that was also adopted by Nubians during different periods of their time. And the Kushites often used the 9 bows as well, most especially when they were already using the iconography that the dynastic Egyptian pharaohs used themselves. And since it shows the generic 9 bows representing essentially all enemies, it can be inferred that she most likely led several military campaigns that were successful against different enemies. Not likely Rome yet during this period, as they were still following the peace treaty, but there would have been other neighbors that they would have had to be dealing with at the time. Following Amonitore, we don't know as much about the Kandakes, though researchers believe that the next Kandake was named Amanikatashan. And her pyramid has been identified. It was heavily looted, though, and then a lot of the reliefs were damaged by looters and time and the elements. But interestingly, there aren't as many depictions found of her smiting enemies, but there was a bronze bell found remaining in her pyramid that depicts bound captives with arrows through them. So clearly there was still a militaristic element to her rule. It just may not have taken center stage as it had with previous Kandakes. Also found within her pyramid were golden hoop earrings with ankhs on them. They're very beautiful. I will share a picture of them on social media whenever I make the post about this episode. But they go to show that she was also still prosperous during her time, even with the looting that had taken place, most likely multiple times from her tomb. We were still able to find a lot of artifacts that archaeologists can study in order to learn more about her and the time period that she ruled during. Several more pyramids have been found that are very obviously belonging to Kandakes, and several of them have the iconography that indicated they might have ruled on their own, but they haven't been fully researched or attributed yet, though one of the last ones that we think we might know the name of already is Amanipalati. And Kandake Amanipalati would have ruled closer to the end of the Meroe period and possibly the middle of the 4th century CE. In the tomb that they believe to be hers, a Kandake is seen sitting on the lion throne. She's holding a bow and a scepter, indicating her role as a ruler, similar to her Kandake predecessors who ruled on their own. Unfortunately, it is nearly impossible right now to do more research on the Kandakes of the Meroe period because the archaeological site of Meroe is heavily threatened by the ongoing conflict in Sudan. It's been specifically damaged already. There have been photographs of people who have gone into these ruins and the temples and the pyramids and looted artifacts. So unfortunately, learning more about these wonderful women is going to have to wait. But I am looking forward to any more research that may come. Until then, we can at least see the echoes of their power that have been left behind from the pyramids and temples that they built and the wondrous engineering projects that they built to help their people. And we even do have some writings from contemporary Roman writers to expand more upon all of these wonderful women, and especially the Kandake who were involved in the battles against Rome. Thank you for joining me on this look at the Kandakes of Meroe and the influence that they left behind. Even if not much is known about them now, I hope that more and more becomes known about them and they do become more famous, just like all of the Egyptian queens who ruled. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with new releases. Please leave a rating and a comment. That helps the show reach others who may be interested in the Past Macabre. For access to bonus content from all Archaeology Podcast Network shows, become a member at archpodnet.com/members. That's archpodnet.com/members. You can find show notes for this and other episodes at archpodnet.com/TPM and follow Past Macabre on Instagram. That's PAST_MACABRE. You'll find pictures of the sites and artifacts discussed, Q&A sessions, and episode topic votes. Hope to see you there.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.